all for joining us today. We'll just pause for a moment or two to make sure that everyone is here and arrived. When I am sharing full screen, I cannot see the chat. And so what we had decided is that we would kind of monitor, we'll pause for questions at a variety of time, and we have plenty of time at the end for questions and commentary. And so we're going to start with introductions. And then, there's an ask at the end of this, which I'm sure you all noticed from the presentation description. And so I would like to ask my esteemed colleague if she would begin by introducing herself.
I'm assuming you mean me, Johnna.
Yes.
Antonia Potenza. I'm an emeritus faculty member from Roosevelt University. I have been engaged in the competency work, I think, since 2017, when I was asked to help the four-year colleges align curriculum to the competencies connected to the ISB licensure programming. And then since then, I've worked with the faculty fellows, and this year I have been involved in the development of the modules. So this is an interesting next step to me.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Johnna.
Yeah, thanks. And my name is Johnna Darragh-Ernst. I am at Heartland Community College, and I have been involved in the competency work for I think 5 or 6 years now, in various iterations and permutations as the work has evolved. Most currently with the modularization work. So Heartland is one of the 5 institutions that's involved, one of the 2 community colleges that's involved in the work. And we are getting ready to pilot this summer, which has just been an interesting, for all kinds of different reasons. And, at each stage of the process, there's just been all kinds of things to learn. And so at this point, we wanted to kind of share with you we're kind of backtracking on some aspects of the journey, and then kind of creating an ask that kind of goes backwards and moves a little bit forward. So I'm going to share some of the history that many of you know very well, and then kind of pick up to the present. Tony's going to share a little bit of the future, and then we're going to go from there. Stephanie, may I ask if you would be willing to introduce yourself as well? Stephanie, of course, you all know very well, and is often behind the scenes, at the front of the scenes, providing all kinds of wonderful supports as well as leadership in a variety of ways. So Stephanie, may I ask you if you'd be willing to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Stephanie Helmer. I work at INCRA. I am a coordinator in our Professional Opportunities and Development department, and I do support the team that works on the Gateway's credentials. And I also am the staff person for the PDAC Qualifications and Credentials Committee. So I do most of that during the day. But yes, I am the one of the point people on the Gateway's credentials. So if you have questions on that, I am definitely more than happy to help.
Thank you. So in terms of the standards and credentials, and I'm sorry, I'm moving things that are blocking my view here. So as you're each aware, the NAEYC Professional Standards and Competencies for Early Childhood Educators were released in conjunction with the unifying framework for the EC profession in March of 2020. And I had to check that date so many times because it was last year, but I kept thinking that has to be 2010, right? It's not, it was last year. So those level standards and competencies were designed to complement the diversity of statewide systems. And one of the things that I think is really important is that NAEYC is supporting the unique nature of existing state systems. They're not expecting a wholesale exact copy of their existing format. And we're going to discuss that a bit more in a minute. Stephanie Bernatite and Joni Scritchlow were in extensive communication with NAEYC leadership during the development and review processes that the NAEYC competencies underwent. And as you know, they had several iterations that were out for public comment. And what they wanted to do was to ensure that our competencies were going to be in alignment with what came out, that there was going to be, well, alignment, I think, is perhaps the best word to use at this point. In addition, NAEYC competencies are designed to promote outcomes accountability and clarity regarding expected skills, knowledge, and expertise. Sorry, somehow clicking on the wrong thing here. Stephanie, is there any way, I'm not quite sure.
Are you trying to advance your slide?
I am trying to advance my slide.
Can you hit the enter button on your PowerPoint? Sometimes.
Yeah, I have it in. I'm so sorry. I feel like I find some new and intriguing way to, okay, I'm going to hit escape.
Oops.
Okay, I am going to stop and I'm going to say, Stephanie, can you please, we've been in this exact position before. I'm having this like complete deja vu.
Yes.
And so I'm going to say, Stephanie, can you take over the controls? Can you share your version of the PowerPoint? And can you go to slide 2, please? And I'm going to say, I have no idea why my Mac, which if you guys could see my Mac, it's like beautiful. It's so clean.
All right, let's see.
Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, but I need to stop sharing, don't I?
Yes, I think that would help.
Yeah, I don't, but I'm frozen. If anyone has any suggestions.
Let's see. Okay, here we go. Let's see if this will help. Did it pop something up for you about?
Yeah, but my screen's frozen.
Oh no. Okay.
I know.
Here. There we go.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. Now what's going to happen?
Now it's going to come right over here. And I will hit share.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. And now we have no.
Well, I'm the one who needs to apologize. I have no idea what happened. So I'm going to like go back to that meditation and I'm going to take a deep breath. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So this is an example of their leveling. And so I had mentioned that there were extensive efforts towards NAEYC's trying to complement the diversity of state systems that exist. And I think this is kind of interesting. So here on the side, we see an example of the NAEYC competency. And so that's an example of NAEYC competency 5C. They use leveling the exact way that we use leveling, in that there's expectation for mastery of competency to build on one another. But they use the idea of levels in a different way. So you see that level 1, level 2, and level 3. And Stephanie, I don't know if, can you make that any bigger? And that is certainly not said in a remotely critical way. That's just said in a spirit of inquiry, if it's possible to make that any larger. Okay, thank you. I'm so grateful for that. And thank you so much for taking over. So as you can see that in the top example, their level 1, their level 2, and their level 3 is exactly the same. And so when I say they're using it in a different way, so the expectation that mastery is the same, they're using it in a different way, in that gen ed content, age range, pedagogy, field experience, that varies by level over time. So before talking about how we incorporated this work into our existing work with Gateways competency, I wanted to just pause and talk a little bit about nomenclature, because I think this idea of like similarities and differences across systems also kind of interestingly gets into that idea of differences in nomenclature on some level. And so if we go back kind of in the history of competency origins in our state, and we think about just where competencies kind of began in early childhood, it originally emerged in ECE in that project between ISU, HCC, IVCC, and ICC. And one of the original impetuses behind, or the original impetus, I don't know if impetus is actually a word, behind moving to competencies was shared language. The lack of shared language was kind of this pervasive barrier. So for example, we found that universities tended to use the language of standards, and community colleges tended to use the language of learning objectives. And while we were talking about the same things, the idea that we weren't necessarily using the same language kind of created this communication breakdown, and that having a shared language in some level really helped to effectively communicate and kind of creatively collaborate. So initially, that level 1, level 2, level 3, because of nomenclature, there's kind of issues with competencies across the field, because there's so many issues in what things are called and what things are referred to. And I'll get back to that in a couple minutes, because that's become another kind of broad issue related to nomenclature. So I just wanted to point out this idea of leveling. And again, I just wanted to say, one of the reasons that NAEYC has things so broadly, they don't expect every state to have exactly 3 levels writ large that you would fit into. They have broad expectations that they expect states to fit into. They do have some specific expectations, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, especially when we get into this ask at the end. So I'm going to pause, and Stephanie, could you please advance to the next slide? Okay, so thank you. And so where we get into kind of our alignment with NAEYC. So once NAEYC said, okay, this is our We've gone through these feedback loops. This is kind of our final version. What we had done in terms of creating this initial alignment between NAEYC competencies and the Gateways competencies was we added what we referred to as behaviors and skills. And you're going to see a specific example of this on the very next slide. There were a couple of different catalysts for this add-on, so to speak. So one was that we received feedback from Charla Long that our competencies would benefit from greater specificity. And I'm sure that that is not information that is like shocking to many of you. And so as each of you know, because the majority of you are very engaged in the Gateways processes in a variety of different ways, our review processes for Gateways are mandated by DCFS to undergo, for the credentials, to undergo a certain review cycle. And those review cycles have a certain time basis to them. The competencies emerged off cycle. And so one of the things that was a requirement during when the competencies emerged was that a certain amount, the majority of benchmark language had to be maintained. And so if you were to compare the competency language to the original benchmark language, you would see that the majority of the benchmark language was maintained. With the behaviors and skills that were added, that we're going to talk to you about, there was not that certain requirement. Those are aligned more specifically to the NAEYC element language. So with these behaviors and skills, they could serve as performance indicators and criterion reference assessments. And again, we're going to map that out more specifically over time. So I just want to return to this concept of language for another brief moment. So one of the individuals who worked with us on this, her name is Tiffany Fries, and she works with the Quilts Institute, and she's a consultant to CBEN. And Nancy Latham and I have had the pleasure of working with her on another project. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about is nomenclature across the field. And the idea, Tiffany's in healthcare, we're in early childhood, and the idea that in healthcare and early childhood, we don't call things the same thing. Even though we're talking about the same thing, all our labels are different and in different states. And in the field of competencies, things are all labeled differently. So trying to come up with lingo that is similar so that we can all understand what we are communicating about has been a persistent challenge, and one that we're really trying to come to some kind of general continuity about, again, for that importance of communication. And that's not just one between states, between early childhood, between healthcare. It's one that exists across fields, across competencies, and just in general across assessment. And so that's been something else that we're kind of threading through and teasing apart, that is just in general interesting and in general persistent as well. Could you please advance to the next slide, Tiffany? Or Tiffany, I'm sorry, Stephanie. Okay, so here we can see an example of, here's CPD 2, where we have the Illinois Gateways competency. And then here we have an example of these behaviors and skills that I referred to. And then here, under them, we see this labeling example. So these behaviors and skills are these examples of alignments to the NAEYC competencies. So you'll notice the labels off to the side. That is the super organized work of Kira Hammond, and that's answering the how can we keep track of which level we intend to apply when some of the levels, you'll remember that chart, that ECE level 1, ECE level 2, ECE level 3, when some of these have the exact same wording, how can we keep track of which level we're intending to align to? So Kira created this system where we could attempt to keep track of that intended alignment. So you can see there, it's 5C level 2-1, 5C level 2-1. In some cases, you might see level 1-1. So the intention behind where that leveling is implied. I'm just going to pause so you can look at that. And then Stephanie, can you please advance to the next slide? So this slide says deeper dive, but I think it should be appropriately titled bigger font, because it's the same thing, just larger. And the intention here is just to show the level in terms of additional detail. So these could also just be characterized as look fors. So these are just giving meat. So as opposed to identified target learning standards, what are those targeted learning standards? What does that mean in Illinois specifically? So giving kind of the meat of what that might specifically mean. I will pause and I will say that this is not set in stone. We're going to return to that, but this is not, this is like a, I think, really good try. So this is not set in stone. And I'm going to go to the next slide and I'm going to give another example that shows kind of a specific alignment. And again, I was telling Tony this morning, like some of the titles of the slides, like when I worked on it, I thought these titles are great. And then I looked this morning, I'm like, what does cross-referencing mean? Maybe it should say alignment. But when it says identifies targeted learning strategies, underneath that shows, here we have what it specifically aligns to in terms of the NAEYC element, which is now the language we're used to, which is now the competency. So that is showing you that alignment. So it is supposed to, there's the look for, and that is how it aligns to what was formerly known as the element. So showing that, so I guess the cross-referencing. So here's the look for, that's what it's specifically referencing on the original table. So I am going to turn it over to Tony at this point. If everybody is comfortable, perhaps.
We did have one question
at
come
the
in.
end.
You might not have been able to see the chat.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, great. Illinois crosswalk, the sample Kira created. Sounds like you had just answered that question.
Oh, okay.
So all is good.
Yeah, the sample that Kira created exists on all of the rubrics for ECE, and Johnna, you can correct me if I am wrong, but it's not one sample. There are listed as performance indicators on all of the rubrics for ECE competencies. The NAEYC elements or the NAEYC competencies themselves are listed out. So that's all there already in some form of language that has been made more pertinent to Illinois, like Johnna's latest example up here of where the NAEYC language for relevant learning standards has been actually determined as to what are relevant for Illinois.
Exactly. And she went through and made sure that everything was covered. That's exactly correct.
Right. Okay. All right, Stephanie, move us along. Okay, so Johnna really has talked about where these alignments came from. This was initially done in a room in Normal, Illinois, on a January day with a group of, I think, 8 people working on this and trying to pound it out. But then it went through the faculty fellows, and those initial NAEYC competencies in the form of performance indicators on the rubrics have also guided the development of the modules that were created this year by teams of faculty from Heartland, from ISU, from Northern Illinois, from National Louis, and from Moraine Valley, using those performance indicators that were on the rubrics as guides to what should be included in a curriculum module that would be leading a student to attaining that competency. I'm hoping I'm making sense as I'm saying this. It all feels very complex as I'm saying this. So there has been review and use by faculty in the course of the last few years. Stephanie, would you move us along again? Okay, and I guess I've just said that. So within the context of the modularization work, we again went and looked at what those NAEYC performance indicators were. Okay, so then as we are thinking about the module content, why don't you move to the next slide, Stephanie? Okay, so I love that Johnna has done this, a trip with Tony, because you're going to be taken through my thinking as we're doing this. So we are in the middle of the module project, and we are developing curriculum modules and looking at the rubrics and looking at the gateways, competencies, and looking at the performance indicators, and hoping that this all comes together in a way that would be tied to NAEYC and to the NAEYC standards and the NAEYC competencies. And I have to admit, I had a little moment of panic because it felt a little removed to be saying that the performance, NAEYC's competencies, which we were calling performance indicators, aligned to our rubrics, would then be, because we looked at them when we were doing the modules, would then show the NAEYC alignment. So I wanted a more direct sense that this would actually play out. So I did a quick review of the modules that had been created and a quick review of the NAEYC standards and competencies, and thought, or actually not with the NAEYC standards and competencies, with the performance indicators, and said, okay, everything seems to line up here, but we need to do a deeper dive to make sure that that one-to-one connection between NAEYC standards and competencies and the gateways competencies connected in the modules. So this is the little road trip that I did. So Stephanie, if you can allow me to share screen, that would be great. Okay. Oh, I don't believe this. It's not allowing me to do this.
Would you like me to open it?
Yeah, would you?
Mm-hmm.
Do I need to send you the document, or do you have it, Stephanie?
I've got it.
Okay, do I need to unshare here?
Nope, I think you are you seeing it now?
No. What I have is the PowerPoint, actually. I don't even know what else I have here. Let's see. Oh, I see it now.
Oh,
Okay.
I was going to say, we can see the competency.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay, I can get rid of the PowerPoint. That's good. Okay, so, all right. So there, in putting this together, I took the same module that Johnna had used as her example, CPD2. So you know what the competency is. Synthesizes the relationship between standards, evidence-based practices, culturally competent teaching strategies, and curricular planning. And you know what? I have another. People are going to have to bear with me. I apologize. I thought I would be able to just lift this up and put it in. Let me just see if I can send this to you, Stephanie, so you can send this other piece. You know what? Never mind. Let's just do this. So what I needed to do was to go through the performance indicators, align them again with NAEYC, see what that connection was. You can see I have the levels as ECE1, ECE2, but it's the same levels as LVL 1 and 2, and then put them together with the competency module. So I don't know, let me walk you through, if I can, a competency module so you can see what the pieces are here in terms of alignment. First is the competency statement itself. Then there is a competency description, which talks about what this competency is about and what the student will be expected to do within the module. Move it down a little bit, Stephanie. There are also sub-competencies that are developed within the module, which are connected to the rubric, which measures the attainment of the competency, and also influence what the learning activities are going to be. Continue to move down, if you will. Next is the summative assessment. And when you are writing a module, competency module, you start with the idea of how do you know that a competency has been attained? What is going to be that summative assessment that tells you that this has been achieved? So the summative assessment really sort of drives what the learning activities are going to be, because you want to be able to bring the student to the point where they can show that they have attained that competency. If you would keep moving. The rubric, and as you can see, the rubric that is going to measure the summative assessment has, in tiny spaces there, the NAEYC standards and competencies that are met, as well as IPTS and InTask. And then continuing to move down, the learning activities that will lead you to achieving the competency. And of course, they are designated as connected to the sub-competencies, sub-competency 1. And if you will move down. Keep going. Sub-competency 2. And as you no doubt noticed as we went through, that there can be more than one learning activity for each sub-competency. And I think in this module, I believe there are 2 learning activities with related formative assessments for each of the needed to be at a number of levels. First with the competency itself, and then moving back up again, Stephanie. Keep going. Keep going. All the way back up to the top. Okay, stop. Okay. With the competency statement and the competency description, then it also needed to be, they also needed to be connected to the sub-competencies. If you can move it. And keep going. And then most importantly, to the summative assessment. You needed to be able, if we are looking at a NAEYC alignment as something that can be used to achieve NAEYC accreditation or NAEYC's approval of a program, NAEYC will ask for outcomes. They will want to be able to, they will want you to be able to show how you know that your students have attained these competencies and these standards. And so the type of assessment that you use is what is going to be reviewed. The assessment and the rubrics are critical to that alignment with NAEYC. So that became a focus. Are those NAEYC performance indicators, are the performance indicators that we say are connected to this summative assessment? Are they connected to the NAEYC standards and the NAEYC competencies? And that alignment is there in the description of the summative assessment. And then later, then looking at the learning activities as supports for this. So that was the walk that I used. First needing to go into more detail and sort of laying everything out, because I needed to be able to see how everything in terms of the performance indicators and the NAEYC competencies and standards connected to each other, and then do these actually appear in the modules, in the summative assessment, in the competency statements. We know that they're there in the rubrics, but does it all follow through? It is that coherence and that consistency that was critical. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. Is that possible? I don't know. At this point, I might also ask if there were any questions. I'm hoping that this was clear with the technology and the complexity of it. Okay, if you move to the next slide, Stephanie. Okay, so where does that leave us? As Johnna said, as Johnna indicated, we are at a point now where we really are looking at reviewing some of the language and some of what has been put in place. We want to look to having an alignment with NAEYC and with the NAEYC competencies. It has been enough time that the competencies have been in existence that they may be reviewed again as a format. And Joni had asked me to indicate that IDHS is one of the reviewing bodies, not DCFS. Basically what we need is to gather people together who are interested in being able to use the gateways competencies as a way of aligning with NAEYC and also ultimately being able to use the competencies and the modules and the curriculum that comes from the competencies for NAEYC accreditation and NAEYC approval. So we're at a very beginning start. And the question is, are there folks out there who are interested in joining us? Johnna, jump in if you have things to add.
Yes, and so I thought that was a very comprehensive description. So Tammy just posted a couple questions. So those have been posted, and I will post the link in a minute or two. But they have underwent review, and we've shared them previously. They underwent review initially. There were about 8 faculty that reviewed them in about 2019, and they're posted in the faculty toolbox, and I'll show you where in a moment, or I'll post the link to them. But we're asking for a broad review, and thank you for correcting my error when I said DCFS. My apologies for that.
Because that was Joni, not me.
Yes, thank you, Joni, for correcting my error. I apologize for that. But we would like them to have a broad review, as Tony said, and these are more malleable than if that is the correct word, than the competencies were. And so we are hoping that not only alignment will be reviewed, in terms of just making sure we have it just right, but that also the language will be reviewed. And that is the kind of thing that you'll have it just right, and then you'll look at it a month later and you'll think, oh, that could be tweaked again. And so we are asking people to join that process, the details of which will be forthcoming. I know on the slide that it says to contact Teresa. We're asking people to contact Stephanie if they would like to be part of that process, as Tony said. We're, in terms of how that will go, I mean, it is a body of work that you would enter into contract to be a part of, and there will be details. And you will be let know of those details as soon as they are known. So to be continued. So I will look up the exact URL to share with you about where those documents can be found. But at this point, are there additional questions?
We had one in the box from Stephanie Siemens about if are all of the institutions that are piloting the program, or are they different for each institution?
Are you talking about the alignments or the competencies, or what is the question? Is Stephanie referring to? What is these?
The alignments.
The alignments are to the modules, and all of the institutions are using the same modules, are piloting the same modules. So this is not a separate alignment for each institution. If you are doing this the alignment is at the level of the gateways at this point of the rubrics, which are shared across all institutions. They are what is going to be shared by everyone to measure competencies. This is the tool for measuring competencies, are the rubrics. So that alignment to the rubrics through the performance indicators is a universal. It's not something that applies only to Heartland, but not to Illinois State. This is the way a competency is measured. And then to the extent that the modules have been developed to as exemplar curriculum, let's say, those alignments are universal to the module as the module is used. Now, if the module is embedded in curriculum, there may be other standards and competencies that are in that course, but the module itself will have its alignment at the point that.
Can I say one thing though, relative to that? And that is that, so I do know that some of the institutions are using the rubrics that you're used to seeing. And I'm sorry, Tammy, and everyone, I just said that I was going to share, and then I went to go look up the URL on my computer, and my computer, I still can't use my keyboard. So my trackpad's still not working, but I will send that out. It's linked to the Gateways Toolbox and linked to the Master Rubrics. It's just over on the right. So we'll send that out as a follow-up somehow. Apologies for that. And then some are using the behaviors and skills rubrics. So Heartland, for example, as part of our modularization work, are using these rubrics within these versions of the rubrics within our modularization work. And so if that is the question that if I'm interpreting your question correctly, Stephanie, or I'm sorry, Shelby, sorry, I'm trying to remember because I can't quite pull up the chat, but if I'm interpreting that correctly, then so there are two different versions of the rubrics that are being used. So some institutions are using this version.
Yes, that was the information I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you.
We've got about 15 minutes left.
Thank you. Other questions or inquiries about the project or the what we're asking people to be involved in. So it will be a review, commentary, suggestions, somewhat similar to, if you've ever been engaged in, I mean, it's much more micro than a credential review process, but it's, commentary on this very, I don't want to say tiny because it's kind of underestimating the process, but it's commentary on this piece, like this piece of the process overall.
Similar to the panelist review of the family specialist crosswalk.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Maybe I could hop in here too and add. And first of all, I want to say I'm so delighted to see that we've got so many participants here in this workshop. But a little bit of grounding, which Tony and Johnna have shared just so beautifully. When you think previous, NAEYC did not have competencies. Just like if you go back pre-2016, we were not using the language of competencies here in Illinois either. And so we've had a group of faculty about every 5 or 6 years, or when NAEYC might change or update some of their standards, look at, for example, historically, previously, our benchmarks, right? That were within our content areas, within our credentials, to make sure we lined up with the NAEYC standards, much as we looked at the Illinois professional teaching standards. So as Illinois is moving its Illinois professional teaching standards to competencies, as NAEYC has moved to competencies, and we have our Illinois competencies that are within our Gateways ECE credential, we want to make sure that everything stays in alignment. That is really, really critical. We don't want to be going off in opposite directions. We want to be very supportive within the Gateways ECE credential of the NAEYC competencies, of the Illinois competencies, which are now in the process of being rewritten. So we're going to have to take another look at that as well. So when we think about that, the NAEYC competency work that came about kind of in the midst of some of these projects. We historically have used a setup where we've had a group of faculty look at, so again, I'm going to go back kind of historically here to what were NAEYC standards, right? And what were our benchmarks, and kind of discern alignment, and then share that with larger faculty for some additional kind of vetting and review processes. And so we're using that same kind of process now. We have looked at this. We've tried to be very aware all along with the work that NAEYC's been doing. They just finished and published all of their competencies. And so we really wanted to make sure that we look very carefully at what their behaviors and skills are. We want to make sure that we are very much in alignment here, just kind of as what it's saying. So we want to take a look at that and make sure that we have really good continuity. And we think it's important to have a lot of eyes on that because there's just different viewpoints. So we really wanted to invite, now that NAEYC has indeed kind of published, if you will, their competencies. And I know we're going to have to do it again. I'm just trying to situate this because Illinois professional teaching standards are in the process of being rewritten and redesigned to competencies. So we're going to need to take another look. But we think it's really important to go ahead and take this look right now with NAEYC. So if you're interested in helping to support this, being a part of this, please do really let Stephanie or Johnna or Tony know, because we don't want to wait. I'm not exactly sure of the time frame on the IPTS work. So I just want to make sure that we go ahead and we take a look at NAEYC now while we have the opportunity to do so. And I really want to thank Johnna and Tony for putting this together today. So I hope that helped a little bit, give you a little bit of context.
Yeah, that was a very big help. Thanks, Johnny. I appreciate that. Stephanie, I see that there's a question about 2 rubrics being used, and I want to clarify that there are individual rubrics for each of the competencies. I think this is what Johnna means, but some of those rubrics have also incorporated checklist language. And that for where a competency is something that can be measured in terms of, done, not done. And so there may be some institutions that are using the checklists and some institutions that are using the more descriptive language from the rubrics. Johnna, is that what you were referring to?
Well, so we're using these rubrics utilize the NAEYC language more explicitly. And so the existing rubrics do align to NAEYC in the same way. And the alignment, and we have data and we've collected data from the existing rubrics. And these rubrics align to the existing rubrics in the exact same way. We just elected as an institution to collect data off of these existing rubrics, and then we can map and extract data to the rubrics that we already have. And so it's just another way to test those rubrics. And so we're using that as another just mechanism.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
So what are the rubrics that you're referencing? Is it the NAEYC rubrics and then the ones that are being developed as a part of this project? Or I guess I'm a little bit confused.
So we have the existing rubrics, and
what are
then
the existing rubrics?
the ones you've seen for years.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there are the ones that we're talking about today, and they're parallel.
Mm-hmm.
They're complementary. It's just the ones that we're talking about today are more detailed. They kind of map NAEYC out much more specifically.
Yes, okay.
wasn't sure which rubrics you were referring to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I probably did not. Yeah, yes. So thank
And
you for
actually, I think that now all of the rubrics that are in the toolbox have those NAEYC performance indicators included. Right?
Right. So there are
Right.
the existing ones, and then there are the ones that are more, there are two sets that are in the toolbox.
Okay. Okay.
We did have a question from Beth Smecka about the documents on the master rubric section of the ECE toolbox have dates on them from 2019. Have these been more recently aligned with NAEYC language, or is that the last time?
Yes. So NAEYC, so they released it in March of 2020, and in October of 2019 is when they put the final stamp on this is done. And I remember it was at the Alliance for Success conference that they said, what's there is done. So they released it to the public in 2020, but yes, they were finished well before that.
March of
officially.
2020.
Yeah, but 2019 is when they actually
Had completed the drafts, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So those 2019 with the, yes, so those were the.
Just about 5 minutes left if anyone else has any other additional questions.
Well, I am going to, again, invite whoever is interested in being involved in this project to get in touch with Stephanie or Johnna or me. It's important work. There is no question that one of the ways to be able to use these competencies that institutions need is to be able to use them to show that they are meeting national standards and national competencies. And we need to make that connection to the NAEYC standards and the NAEYC competencies explicit and consistent with our rubrics, eventually with our curriculum and our modules, with our signature assessments that we would be using for accreditation and approval processes. And so it's clearly a lot of work, but it is, as Johnna said so beautifully earlier, at the future, we hope. And so we invite people, please, to come on board.
Yes, and I want to make one just final clarifying everything Tony said. And I want to clarify the rubrics. So we have these two sets. The rubrics are essentially the same, but we added the additional NAEYC content.
Right.
There's not two totally different rubrics. There's additional content and look fors that really kind of heighten that NAEYC content. And then when we send out that information relative to NAEYC, you'll be able to clearly see that. It's not that there are two completely different sets of rubrics. They're really this, but they have additional kind of rich detail associated with it and look fors. So I just wanted to clarify that. And we are so hoping that many of you are willing to join us in this next step. So thank you so much for being a part of this today.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm seeing other questions coming in, but I think we are like 2 minutes out. And for Julia, the changes to IPTS, Illinois Professional Teaching Standards, are across the board for teacher licensure programs, including early childhood. But it is not across the board for all the other areas of gateways credentialing. So it doesn't affect the infant toddler credential. It doesn't affect the school age child credential or, family care worker, but it will be something for us to think about in terms of what the ECE competencies are when we're looking at what the ECE IPTS competencies will be. That's also going to be in the mix at some point. Exciting times, lots of change. Oh, and Tammy also asks, will gateways recognize the NAEYC alignment when determining credentials and degree attainment? Yeah, I think we need to see how the alignment works out. But the goal is to have there be consistency as much as possible between NAEYC's standards and competencies and gateways, as much as we can do that. We know already that it's not a perfect alignment, and certainly their leveling is not perfect compared to ours, but yeah, we're hoping to make this as close as possible. Looks like we're being knocked out.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
And everyone for being in attendance.
Yeah.
Thank you.